Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds. I'm Nerdist Dave. Today I'm joined by T1J. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. We were talking a little bit beforehand, and I was unfamiliar with your YouTube channel. It's actually not a D&D channel, which we've had like tons of those YouTubers on here. But my youngest brother, he messaged me a video and said you should have this guy on, and it was your video on Dungeons and Dragons. And I watched it and I was like, you're absolutely right. I should have this guy on. And since then, I've also watched, some of your other videos, and some of your other content. It's no secret on here that I've mentioned before. A lot of times when I take in content is on D&D content, which you happen to do.
Mhm.
And your production values are really good. The way you present stuff is really good and professional and easy to digest and very like inviting. Um,
Thank
but
you.
before we go any further, as always, links are in the description and go check them out, including that video that I was introduced to T1J by. But if you would kind of introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about what you do.
Um, sure. I'm T1J. I have a YouTube channel that it's kind of like a personal channel. It's a video essay channel, I would say, but normally I make videos about social issues, politics, a little bit of pop culture, analysis sprinkled in there. Um, and that's pretty much what I'm known for the most part. But more recently, I guess I've been revealing some of the other interests I have, of which tabletop gaming and D&D and RPGs and stuff happens to be like one of my favorite things to do now. So
What was the impetus to do the Dungeons and Dragons video?
I've just been trying to, like, when you do politics and stuff, it can get really exhausting, and I've just been trying to, you know, show my audience that there's more to me than that, and that in fact, sometimes I want to talk about other stuff. Um, and I've just been so excited about D&D that I just want to, I just want to show it to everyone that hasn't seen it yet. So I think that's probably why.
I feel like that's a fairly normal and natural inclination for us that play D&D. We kind of become ambassadors to the hobby and just kind of want to share it with everyone. I feel like a lot of us D&D YouTubers, that's why we started doing what we do. We just want more people to play the game.
Yeah, definitely. I'm always I'm an advocate anytime, even people that are like hesitant, I'm like, just give it a try. Or I'll run it like a solo game for you, just to see, no pressure. I don't know, I feel like everyone should play, or just give it a try.
So how did you get involved with RPGs?
Well, it's always been sort of around me. A lot of my friends have been playing for much longer than I have. And I've always been into like video games, and um in particular I played a ton of World of Warcraft. So I was always in sort of that like sort of fantasy role playing arena, but I wasn't originally that interested in D&D. And really what got me into it is just watching a lot of the D&D content, on the internet. And as I said in my video, the one that specifically got me interested in it was Dimension 20. Um, and just I don't know what it was about that specifically, but after watching that, I guess it was just because, it was just a well-made program and, well-run game that I was just like, oh, I want to try this. And then, because of my, history playing World of Warcraft and other games, it's like, oh, it's kind of like that. So I feel like, and I think that probably applies to a lot of people these days that are kind of coming in from video games. because it's almost, it's like kind of like a video game, except you have way more freedom. um so I think that was like my transition.
It's always fun to kind of play with the video gamers coming in, and
Yeah,
like as they try and like, it's almost like a toddler testing the boundaries of what they can do. It's
exactly.
like there's no, you're no longer like constrained by the program of the game you're playing. So it's like, well, what can I get? What can
Yeah,
I get away with? What can my character do? Um, is it
right.
what have I? What one of the things I've experienced, and it's kind of fun to watch.
Yeah, for sure. When I started playing D&D, I basically like rounded up a bunch of my friends and we kind of all learned it together. But I was running the game like as the DM, so it was interesting trying to break them out of that mindset as well. It's like, no, you like literally tell me what you want to do and we'll figure it out. Like I think
Yeah.
they were a little hesitant at first.
Was there any resistance in your friend group when you first introduced the idea of D&D to them?
It was I think they were a little nervous at first. Um but it was surprisingly easy for me. I don't know. I think I'm not sure why. But my theory is that, you know, we're all in our 30s and I think we're just looking for stuff to do,
Yeah.
like we're just trying to get out of the house and interact with people. So
I th-
that's my theory at least.
I think as we get older, after you hit a certain point, you no longer care about the perceptions of other people,
Right.
nearly as much, and like it's easier to break down these barriers. I think, like in your video, you even mentioned like you kind of thought of it as this thing that nerdy white people did, right? And
Hmm.
so I've definitely heard other creators also mention like one of my favorite creators is LJP, which talks a lot of like the business side of RPGs
Hmm.
on stuff Lewis Porter Jr. And like one of the things that like he said in his videos is like, black people get into playing D&D by having a white friend. Like, and I feel like that is going away though. Like now there are so many more ways for it to get introduced because literally like the way I got introduced to the game and probably most of my friends growing up was just by knowing someone else that played the game, really. And that's,
Hmm.
I mean, like that, you can even break down what Lewis Porter Jr. said to that, like just by knowing someone who played the game. Um, but it, now as it expands, there's like a lot more people and it's getting more diverse.
Yes, for sure. And I've been seeing that a lot as well. And I think that, well, and incidentally, I did a video not too long ago about the idea of like the black nerd, and I feel like a lot of people, whether they like identify as nerds or not, but I think a lot of people may have tried D&D or other, stereotypically nerdy things long before, but there's just like social pressure and stuff. But it's like it's not like, black people or anybody was like naturally um uninterested in that sort of thing. So it's good that we're seeing more of that now, and even not just more people playing the game, but just like a whole new perspective of what kind of game it is and stuff like that. And that, I mean, and that's just the benefit of diversity in any field or industry or whatever. So
Yeah, I mean, the game was very like, medieval European,
yeah.
derived, and that, that mythology, folklore, but very European centric and Tolkien. And now it's as more people come to the game, they're bringing a wider variety of myth and lore
Mm.
to it, to expand upon. So anytime you can change it up. Plus, we've been playing the same game for like I don't know how long it's been now. 50, 70 years. So it could use a facelift here and there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think even I'm not, I'm still fairly new to the game, so I'm not too sure like what it was like many years ago. But there's options even within D&D as it is now that people can explore that I feel like don't get explored that much. Like there's all the there's this whole world, and there's like places in the lore that are like analogs for like South America or Africa, or places where in our world there would be more people of color. And I feel like that's an opportunity to maybe explore different themes, different cultures, things like that, or even using like different races as analogs for you know uh diversity or whatever. Like I feel like that those opportunities already even exist in the game, if you wanted to go down that path.
Yeah, it is, and it's also starting to it's starting to get introduced more and more. Like I think there's either it just ended or is getting close to that. Yeah, it just ended. Into the Motherlands is a Afrofuturistic RPG, right? And
Hmm.
the idea is the premise of like, well, how would these cultures have developed if there was no
Hmm.
colonialism in them? And so people are starting to make that kind of content that they want to see, and it's getting out there as we get more voices in the space. Actually, like I've found like a great place for more diversity in the space, and where I see content creators really coming up is TikTok. I don't know if you've messed around with that at all or not.
Not too much. I should probably, like, as a content creator, I should probably pay attention to that kind of stuff. But
That was my
I
initial thought as well. But then I got
yeah.
over it. I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. But at the same time, like I discovered there's like these really vibrant communities over there. So now I'm just like a lurker.
Yeah, that's really cool. I didn't even really know about that, so I probably will check that out.
Yeah, well, I guess like the barrier to entry is a lot lower. It's like if you have a smartphone, you can get over there and start creating content.
Hmm.
And it is also a lot more casual. Although even over there, you can see like the production is starting to grow, like like it did with YouTube over time. So like I
Right.
feel like it's an easy on ramp for content creators.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Um, so you said you kind of brought the game to your friends and kind of got them started. So does that mean you started off as a dungeon master?
I did, yes. Partly because I don't think I would have started otherwise. Like,
Yeah.
as many people have attested, sometimes it's hard to get a game going, especially if you're first starting. Um, to be honest, though, like I said before, like a lot of my friends had been playing before, a lot of my other friends, but I just wasn't that aware of like what when the games were. I guess they maybe assumed that I wasn't interested, so we didn't really talk about it that much. But um, I basically realized it's like if I run the game, I can just find some people to play, and then the game's going. And I understood that being the DM is a little bit more work, and I almost just out of consideration, like I didn't want to expect anyone else to do that. So but also like the DM role was very appealing to me. Um, I I like the idea of you know sort of like being in control of the story, and kind of um, guiding everything along. Like that was very appealing to me. So I think I was naturally inclined to do it.
Also, I feel like as a YouTube creator, you're already kind of a storyteller, right? So it
Yeah.
seems like kind of a natural extension to take those stories and and share them with your friends and have them get involved. So Brian wants to know: are there issues that arise in the political sphere that are interesting to push to 11 in a fantasy setting?
Yeah, I mean, like any all of it really. Depending on depending on the game, obviously maybe your players don't want to deal with super intense political strife, but it's definitely interesting. Like we've had games that dealt with like racism and political power struggles, which I think is very common in games like this. Um, even things like the economic issues you can deal with. I think all of those things can be interesting in games.
Yeah, anything that's kind of a hot button take in real life can always be dialed up to turn into a D&D adventure. I
Yeah.
mean, actually, even things that aren't can be dialed up to be turned into a D&D adventure. Many of like a Christmas special or holiday special has been turned into adventures in our games.
Yeah.
So, now that you've been playing for a while, do you now also get a chance to flip to the other side of the DM screen?
Um. Yeah. I mean, every now and then, I I'm trying to experience the game more as a player. I definitely have mostly DM'd, but I've actually had in my group a couple of the players have built up the courage to like run their own one shots and allow me some time to play. So that's pretty cool that they're getting more into it like that. And I I'll hop into someone else's game every now and then, or if I have a friend who streams, and every now and then I'll hop into one of his games. So yeah, I'm doing it a little bit more.
What channel is that? If you don't mind mentioning it.
That is it's twitch.tv/Carrion Comfort Studios. I believe that's what it is. Yeah, Carrion Comfort Studios. He mostly runs games other than D&D, but I think he's going to start doing more D&D, but it's yeah. And
Well, I mean, we like playing other games than D&D. It is just like if you're a
yeah.
content creator, it is the easiest thing to make content about as far as RPGs. I mean, even D&D is a small niche on YouTube compared to the rest of it, but it's so much bigger than just other RPGs.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like we notice whenever we do videos that aren't D&D centric, you're like you can expect like a third of the normal views.
Right.
Which I mean that's a whole nother thing with creating content on YouTube. It's like its own little addiction.
Yeah, for sure. So there I would like probably the other most significant game I've been part of was on that channel. It was a Vampire the Masquerade game. And we did I think it was maybe like an 8-session campaign. Might be coming back in the future, so if anyone is into that, they can check it out. But that was some of the most like non-GMing that I did.
Yeah. And and it's also that like that's a very different game too. It tends to be a lot more social interaction and political
For sure.
intrigue.
For sure. Yeah, and honestly, like these days, it seems like, at least in my experience, people are constantly telling me you should try out this other system. You should try out this system. You should try this. So I don't know. I'm still like super into D&D right now, but maybe as you play for a while and you want to try new things, that's when you start really branching out.
Well, I've been playing D&D for probably over 30 years now, over 30 years. And while I do enjoy playing other systems, I always end up back at D&D. So I don't know. I don't know if it's a comfort thing, it's a habit thing, but I definitely still enjoy playing D&D. And after all this time, it hasn't really gotten old to me. But at the same time, it's also fun to explore other things as well.
Yeah, well, that's good. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine not being into D&D or like, but maybe I'm just still in that honeymoon phase.
But I'm also like kind of specific how I enjoy games as well. Like if I'm going to play a fantasy game, I'm inclined to play D&D. But if you talk about like almost any other genre or trope, then I'm like, oh, here's another system for that. Uh,
Hmm.
where like there's so many times we get asked the question like, how do I play Star Wars with D&D? How do I play X with D&D? I'm like, well, there's about five different Star Wars games that you can play,
You're
or
right.
or they made that game over here which would work really well, or this generic system is great for that. So I think that's part of like our mindset as well that makes it easy for us to kind of slip in and out of playing D&D and other games.
Yeah, for sure. I and I think that's something I will, start to explore more as time goes on. But D&D is, or at least this edition of D&D is very flexible, and I've seen people do some really cool stuff with D&D that has nothing to do with fantasy. I mean, as you know probably, but
Oh yeah, there's science fiction hacks, there's superhero hacks, there's modern. There's all kinds. We even did I guess there was an Unearthed Arcana that came out with some like D&D modern stuff in it for 5e. And
yeah.
so we ran a game called Nerdarchy Saves the World, and we like basically played a modern game as ourselves that kind of had like the fantasy world like creeping into the real world. Um, and we did like a mini series with that.
Yeah, I like we're my group is like, we've got this long campaign going, and I was one of the ideas we have for our next adventure is a modern game, like one and set in the
Yeah,
modern times.
yeah, and there's probably like there's probably a rule set out there that someone has hacked that if you didn't want to make up your own, you could just use theirs. Like at this point, I
Yeah.
think off the top of my head, I can think of at least like four other science fiction, science fantasy games that are based off of 5e.
Yeah.
So there's a plethora to choose from.
And I guess that's one of the beautiful things about just the hobby is just like never ending things to explore and learn and discover, it seems.
I mean, humans have been telling stories since they could, since before they could paint them on cave walls, right? And like, so I don't see that stopping anytime soon.
Right. Yeah. You're
Uh,
right.
and for me, like one of the things I guess early on that I really loved about D&D was like I'm not a very good artist and I can't play any instruments, but I feel like we can all kind of tell stories and get better at telling stories. And
Yeah.
D&D and RPGs gives us that chance to do that.
Yeah, that's true because like I was saying, I was naturally um uh I naturally found the DM role appealing, and I figured that's because, I'm a creative person, I make stuff for a living, and I've always, as a kid, I used to draw as a kid. But I found like the people that you don't expect to be the creatives can still, run great games and tell great stories. And I guess because storytelling is just like a very human thing, regardless.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it feels like it shouldn't be, but it's one of those things that's like ingrained into our lizard part of our brains.
Yeah, apparently.
Yeah. Well, I guess you know what? Because like humans don't have the instincts the way other animals do. Like we've developed and adapted by transferring information to each other. And one of the most effective ways we can do that is through stories.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it, I and it, and you get like different perspectives and different ways of seeing things too when you hear stories from people from different backgrounds or different interests.
So, what other games have you tried other than Vampire and D&D?
I played a bunch of, not a bunch, but I played a little bit of Call of Cthulhu. Um, and I've tried like can't remember what it's called. uh like I played like some of the Powered by the Apocalypse stuff.
Okay.
But that's kind of about it.
I'm currently running a Monster of the Week game, and then I haven't checked out Dungeon World yet. But Powered by the Apocalypse is a great system.
Mhm.
I love it because like when I decided to start running that, and my wife was jumping in that game, she was kind of intimidated because it was a new game. I'm like, nah, just pick one of these playbooks, right, and check
Uh-huh.
some boxes. It's really
Yeah,
easy.
it is incredibly easy. Yeah.
It is like, it's funny, like D&D is like almost everyone's entry point into the hobby, yet is far from the easiest game to start with.
Yeah, for sure. um,
So, you said you've played on some stream games. How do you like being on stream games opposed to just playing with your, at home with your friends or in private games?
I mean, I like stream games. I mean, I'm comfortable like being on camera and being in front of an audience. I think the only thing with that is, at least in my experience, I'm usually playing with people that have way more experience than me,
Uh-huh.
and that can be a little bit intimidating. And so, and I think the thing with me too with like role playing, like I feel like I'm still learning like how to be a good role player. And I think that can be a little bit more intimidating when you're in front of an audience. Um, but I mean, I enjoy it, and I don't, like I said, I'm comfortable being in front of an audience for them, in general.
Yeah, I mean, good is relative, right? Too, especially because
Yeah,
I've played with people that they talk about their character in the third person point of view, and at the same table we'll have someone that only speaks in character, right? And if
yeah,
they're using their regular voice, we know it's them talking and not
yeah.
nothing about the character. And I think it's like the cool part about the hobby that there's plenty of room for all types of gamers. And I mean, even on stream games, I think it's good because in a way it's almost like another form of representation, like of people seeing the gameplay different ways and people enjoying it different ways, so that it kind of shoots down this idea of wrong fun, right? As long as
Hmm.
everyone at the table is having fun in their own way, and it's not at the expense of everybody else, it's all good. So I actually like it when people can see different people playing the game different ways.
Yeah, I mean, and I would agree with that as well. Um, I think another thing with me is I've I've never like GM'd a game on stream,
Yeah.
and I feel a lot more comfortable GMing, I guess, because I'm the type of GM that likes to have a lot of stuff prepared. So I feel a lot more comfortable. But like when you're like role playing as a player, a lot of times it's you know you got to be off the cuff a lot more, and I'm still getting better at that. I feel like, but definitely I agree with what you're saying. Just watching different people play the game, and I have to realize like I'm kind of a like naturally sort of chill person, I guess. And sometimes I feel like I'm like, are they gonna think I'm boring on stream or something? But like, there's chill. You can be a chill character, stuff like that. So
There's definitely nothing wrong with that. I mean, imagine like folks that have only watched like Critical Role and like really high end role players, and
yeah,
feeling like you have to play the game like that all the time.
right.
I think that would just like flat out just kill some people.
Yeah, it's important to remember that, like, you know, you don't have to be like that. We're not all professional actors and improv people.
You mentioned watching Dimension 20 when you got into it. Do you watch other stream games?
I watch. Well, that's one of the motivations for making that video was to get more suggestions and stuff. Like I watch everything Dimension 20 does. I watch Critical Role. I've checked out some other things, although I'm not, I'm not uh as like religious a watcher as I am for those two. But I've checked out like Matt Koval's The Chain. I've checked out Sirens of the Realms. Not D&D, but I love LA by Night. So I've watched a lot of that. So I watched a lot of the more popular ones, I guess. But I've been asking for more suggestions for sure.
You must have a lot of free time on your hand. That's the problem with stream games is like they require a lot of commitment because every episode is like 2 to 4 hours.
For sure. Yeah. That's one of the problems with like trying to watch more stuff. But
yeah,
it's definitely I watch that stuff instead of like others. Like I don't watch TV shows that much. I don't watch movies that much actually. So that's what I watch instead.
No, I totally get that. Like like me and Ted were reviewing Critical Role Campaign 2 for a while, and because it just felt like a good like onboarding for us, and we did quite a few of those episodes, and I hated it. As soon as like they would roll initiative, I would like fall asleep. I just did not enjoy watching it. But Ted's a huge fan. I'm a fan of what they do, but for me, it's kind of like if I had the choice of watching people play wiffle ball or playing, I would always choose to play. Right? Like, I felt the same. Like, I don't like watching sports, but I like playing in the game. And I think D&D is the same way for me. But I do think it's awesome that people can, put it out there for people to watch and for people to see how other people play.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like, well, I in my video, I actually mentioned how I tried out Critical Role before I started playing D&D, and I could not watch it. Like I found it like really slow and not that interesting. But after I got really into D&D, I tried it again and kind of became obsessed with it.
Do you think it's because now you got like the inside jokes and like when they mentioned rules and stuff, you knew what they meant?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I watch these shows just for like inspiration for my own games. I do think Critical Role is like I feel like the episodes are too long for sure. but I still
described it as like 2 awesome hours of content spread over 4. It's like if they could like edit it down, it would be amazing. Yeah. Cut out all the fights. I just like them role playing and going shopping and just exactly. Drawing dicks on stuff. That's all I want.
Right. Yeah. No, I feel you for sure. Like when the combats, I feel like those are especially what I use mainly just to get ideas and inspiration.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can see how the combats. I mean, there's some episodes where the whole episode is combats, like really, like 4 hours of combats. Like
that's D&D. Like, I mean, that's always weird to me. Like when you get the criticism, like that's not real D&D. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, maybe not, at that level with, the acting chops and the role playing, but everything else is literally things that have happened in games that, that I've played in and see it, the shopping, the fights that last forever. I also like start like armchair D&Ding, I guess, especially like when they would get into fights and I'm like, Sam, you're a rogue. Why aren't you hiding as a bonus action? Why aren't you getting more sneak attacks?
Yeah. but I mean that's also D&D. People like forgetting to do stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
That's one thing about Critical Role. I guess just echoing off what you said. Obviously they're all talented actors and stuff, but from what I've seen, like that's like maybe the only popular show that feels like real D&D to me, or like not real D&D, but like it flows the way that like home games go. It seems like
Yeah.
that I kind of respect the fact that they don't they don't feel pressured to like make sure the games are structured in a certain way. Like they just play the game out, and I kind of like that. That may contribute to why it's sometimes hard to watch, but uh
It's legit. And
yeah.
that is my sentiment exactly. I feel like they do a far better job of just playing the game than like we do, because I definitely change how we stream the game to take into account there is an audience. Like, so like
Yeah.
if I'm starting if I'm starting a new stream, I pretty much always start with an action scene, and
Hmm.
and try not to do the thing where people go around the table and just introduce themselves. Like, I rather like just get right into the game and then incorporate the introductions later on into the session.
Hmm.
And so I very much do think about it as a show as well as a game. And
Yeah.
that's like that's the tough part, like walking that fine line between making sure it's still a game.
Right. And perhaps Critical Role is just at a point where they can get away with it when other people couldn't. um but yeah, and you have to think about the audience, and maybe even some of the audience are people that you know don't play or haven't played yet. Like, you know like I said, Dimension 20 is really what kickstarted me into the game. And I feel like if that wasn't such a like tightly produced show, I may
Yeah.
not have been as interested in it. So you do have to think about that sort of thing.
Do you think, is that like your personality, or do you think that's because you're a YouTuber and you just like have an expectation?
It may be a little bit of both. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I do sort of, I don't know if I have an expectation, but I do have that I guess that eye for that sort of thing, and just I appreciate, that sort of thing when, it's a tight production, I guess.
I know, like, I don't think it's so much now, but before, when Matt Colville would do videos, there'd be so many jump cuts. And I don't think most people would notice them because it's just a guy staring at the camera. So it's
Hmm.
not as noticeable, but I would start counting every time I watched the
Yeah.
videos, and it would drive me crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I use a lot of jump cuts in my videos too. I think that's just kind of like a relic of old school YouTube, I think. And it's at this point, I think it's the people that do it like that. It's basically a an intentional sort of stylistic choice, but it's definitely less uh in favor these days. Like
Yeah.
just jump cut, jump cut, jump cut.
Like, we went to a three camera shoot to try and like break that up some, because also
Yeah.
we're terrible, and I'm sure our editor hates us when it comes to post. I know
Yeah.
when I used to edit our videos, I hated us. So
Yeah, that's and I want to like I would like to do more streaming games and stuff, but it would be great if someone else edited it.
yeah. Well, I think that is part of the appeal to doing stuff live. I think, like,
Hmm.
once it goes up, it goes out to the world and it's done.
Yeah.
So it's a lot easier on the back end. Um, so are there any RPGs on your radar that you haven't gotten to play yet that you're interested in?
I mean, I'd like to try anything at least once. I mean, a lot of people um have suggested uh Shadowrun. Um and there was another one that I keep getting. I can't remember.
Shadowrun has such fantastic lore, and I've never
Yeah.
actually played it, but just hearing about the rule sets is usually enough to put me off to that system. So
Mhm.
we ended up doing a cipher system game where the GM kind of hacked cipher system to run Shadowrun without touching the Shadowrun rules. And when they first started looking at it and looking to do that, they started poking around, and they had actually found some powered by the apocalypse hacks as well. So there's definitely other people that kind of agree that like fantastic setting and concepts, but you know the rules are super complex and clunky, and
Yeah.
the older I get, the less complex I want.
Yeah, I could see that. I'm I wonder like if I try some of these other systems, um, am I gonna even be into it? Because I got started with D&D 5e, which there's some complexity to it, but from what I understand, it's you know less complex than some of the other games. Um, but like I said, I want to try everything and see what sticks out to me.
Yeah. Like so 5e is like I feel like it's the easiest version of D&D in a
Yeah.
sense like one first edition and second edition were actually less complex, but at the same time more complex because like they did these weird things where they built in the rules they did build in had like these unnecessary levels of complexity. Like the THACO is a big one to hit armor class 0. And instead of having an armor class that would just go up like 5e does, it would go from 10 to -10. And the lower your armor class, the better. And then there was a chart like for what everyone needed to hit armor class 0. And then
Yeah.
from that, you either added or minused, right? But if it was a negative, it actually made the number go up. But if it was a positive, it made the number go down to what you needed. Like far less rules, but the ones they did make were like overly complex for like no reason.
Yeah, I wonder why that is. I know like in I mean I like mechanics in games, like that kind of stuff
Yeah.
is cool to me. But I mean I guess it should be like there should be a reason for it to be there other than just it being there.
I
Like
feel like
in D&D, I love like the role playing and stuff, but I like combat a lot because of the mechanics. I like, trying to use the different rules and things like that. That's cool to me, but there's definitely a limit, I guess.
yeah, for sure. Like just because something's more complex doesn't automatically make it better, right? So I do
Hmm.
like the fact that that how the game has evolved to make the rules simpler, more streamlined, and like and third edition added way more rules and complexity, and also you could do more stuff, and it was kind of more interesting. But at the same time, like they had a rule for everything. Inevitably, if you were going to GM, you were going to inevitably have at least one player at the table that knew the rules better than you, and there were a lot of them, and it would
Hmm.
just bog down the game. Um, I think like the motto for 5es it's about rulings, not rules. So that
Yeah,
is actually far more of a philosophy from AD&D than the later editions.
yeah, and I mean, I it's all I know, but I really like the way that it works.
The in the 80s it seemed like there's like tons of RPGs coming out, and like I think designers felt like the thing that made their game better or worse was how many tables and charts they could pack into a book.
Yeah.
Which we thankfully have gotten away from that. uh, so how much how often do you feel like you pull from your content to put into your games, or do you kind of like stay away from that?
I'll do it a little bit. Um, for the most part, at least in my home D&D game, it's you know, I don't think for the most part like my videos are about politics and world issues and stuff like that. For the most part, I don't think that's what our group is really interested in. We're just like, you know, hanging out, killing monsters and stuff. Every now and then I throw in, I think, an interesting social conflict or an interesting political conflict. But at least the game, and this was actually on purpose. I've kind of evolved as we've been going on. We've been playing for like 3 years or so. But my idea in the beginning was, since we were all new, I was gonna try to make the most D&D game that I
Yeah.
could. So like
What does that even mean?
like I wanted to be super high fantasy.
Yeah.
There's dragons and wizards and giants, and I wanted to be like, okay, this is D&D. Obviously, there's more to it than this, but that's kind of idea I had. So it's you know it's a little exaggerated and campy and things like that. But I do every now and then try to sprinkle, um, political conflict or stuff like that. Not that political conflict is not central to D&D, but in a realistic way.
Yeah. Well, I could also see, wanting to separate that part of your life from maybe your D&D games as a way to like to take a break, as well. Um,
Yeah.
just like when like in the content I like to absorb, it tends to not be D&D content because that's what I do all the time, all day, every day. So, so I retreat into other aspects of the world and in order to take a kind of a break and give my mind a rest.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. It's at the end of the day, it's supposed to be fun, and I think that's how the rest of the group sees it. And you know, I don't think they're trying to think too hard. They just want to sit down and have some fun. So in that way, it definitely is a bit of a escape from what not only my job but also their jobs. So
Do you usually run homebrew stuff or official content?
as of now, I basically run heavily modified versions of the official content. That's kind of what I do. I um, use the pre-written stuff as a baseline, and then just kind of add a bunch of my own stuff. I think I am probably on our next campaign. I'm going to try to do a fully homebrew campaign, um, but we'll see how that goes.
Both are absolutely legit ways of doing it, and actually one of the reasons why I don't do as much official stuff is because I feel like it's more work. Because I would do what you're talking about. Like I would want to modify things, add things,
Mhm.
change things, customize things, and at the end of the day, I'm like, I could have probably just made something up, and it would have been easier.
It's true. It, but I do like, like my game takes place in the official Forgotten Realms world, and
Yeah.
it is very handy that that's all been fleshed out already. So I see what you're saying, but I also like that I can just like go to the wiki and be like, what is this place like? And then
Yeah,
just
there's information there. Your players, they can. It's also shared information. Your players can look them and be like, oh, I'm in
Mhm.
Daggerford. What does that mean?
Right, exactly.
There's definitely benefits to that as well. Sure.
Yeah.
I think for 5e, I just wrapped up Curse of Strahd as a player, and that was like this group was the first time I've actually played in anything that was official.
Really.
We're very well. I mean, honestly, like we've been playing a long time, and so we've just kind of like have become more improv GMs over time, and it just literally stems from like doing a bunch of work, writing almost like our own full length adventures with flavor text and everything,
Hmm.
and having your players show up and them not like touching anything you wrote, and having to improv because
Yeah.
they just want to know about Sparkles the Goblin in the tavern that you made
Yeah.
up on the fly because someone asked a question, right? So it's like, oh, I'm glad I spent hours working on this. So so like, and then what'll happen is you get busy, you don't have time to prep that week, and you're like, oh, I guess we're just gonna run it anyway, and it goes off without a hitch, and it goes fine. Or in some cases, like your players end up liking that session better that you put like zero work into, and you're like, huh, why am I doing all this work?
Yeah, I know that feeling for sure because, like I said earlier, I like to prep a lot, but obviously your players are just gonna go way off what you had prepared.
Yeah.
So you definitely have to think on your feet a lot of the time.
Have you seen anything from Sly Flourish, the lazy DM?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, he's got some really great resources, and really like articulated kind of like how we play the game much better than we ever could. Um,
Hmm.
and when we found his stuff, we were like, "Yep, that's definitely the way to do it."
Yeah. Well, I'm still like, I mean, I feel like I learn something new like every day about, different styles of running games or different ideas. So uh there's always more to learn, I guess.
Yeah. Also, all that being said, like there is no right or wrong way. It's like whatever makes you feel comfortable as a GM. That's what everybody should do. Yeah, that's the perfect amount of prep.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And but it's just kind of like a self-imposed sort of
Yeah.
uh thing where it's like, oh, I could do that better. Like as far as I know, like my players love the game. They like never complain. So I'm lucky in that sense. But for me, like personally, it's like, okay, I can maybe make this a little better or, work on that. So
So, were you into like fantasy fiction before D&D?
I wasn't actually. um and that's an interesting thing because it seems like, at least in my experience, it seems like people get into D&D either from fantasy fiction or more so now, or not maybe more so, but like for video games.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely more on the video game side. But yeah, I never was really that into fantasy fiction.
Has that changed at all since you've been playing D&D?
I guess I'm more interested in it, but I haven't really dived into it at all. Um, I feel like D&D is my fantasy fiction right now. I mean, I'd be interested to check. I've definitely been exposed to more, um, or I've learned about it. I just haven't really dived into it yet.
Well, for me, I think like either like right around the same time, I was probably like really discovering gaming and D&D. I was also discovering reading. I think RPGs actually got me into reading, like because we were playing Marvel superheroes, and we were playing like the pre-existing characters, and everyone had already picked like the really strong characters that everybody already knew about, like the Hulk and Thor,
Mm.
and you know, so like I'm just looking at game stats at this point. I'm like, who is this Sasquatch character? I kind of like this guy. And then like, that got me into reading comic books. Which then, led to me reading, novels as well. So I feel like RPGs kind of got me into reading. And also too, like, I mean, we're also talking about like the 80s. So it's not like we had video games the way they have them now, right? So,
Yeah.
we had like ColecoVision and Atari. There were little boxes on the screen that you had to look at, and if you wanted to play a good arcade game, which wasn't really that great, you had to actually go to an arcade. So, I guess our experience was much different back then.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Actually, when I was younger, I read a lot of comic books, and maybe that, you know, instilled a that sort of I guess that sort of interest in, you know, the adventure stories and stuff like that. But I kind of stopped reading comic books like when I got to like after I pretty much when I got to college, I guess. Um, so yeah, I don't know. There's all these different threads, but I think the
Yeah.
most direct thread for me was definitely video games, and because I've loved all the RPGs, and I love MMO RPGs, so I think that definitely contributes to why I like the tabletop RPG stuff.
So Shallander in the comments says Sasquatch is great, but Puck is the best. Actually, Puck was my favorite character for a while, especially for Alpha Flight. Shout out to not well known comic books. Yeah, I was in my early 20s when I stopped reading comics, and really it was just because like my pull list got so expensive. I was just like, I should probably just take up crack or something. I think I could save some money.
Yeah, no, that's part of the same reason for me.
Well, when you said around college, I'm like, yeah, that sounds about right. You're like, I could like eat this week or buy comic books.
That's another great thing about D&D is you don't you don't have to spend money on it if you don't want to. It's just kind of as much as you're, and I say this as a person who has spent an ungodly amount of money on D&D, but
Yeah.
um the game is playable, like perfectly playable, with very limited amount of money spent. So that's pretty cool too.
Yeah, we had one of the designers on, and one of the things that they took into consideration when creating 5e and the organized play rules was they were at a convention and or a store or something, and they observed two kids coming over and watching people play. And the one kid remarked about like, hey, this looks like a lot of fun. This looks really cool. And the other kid responding, looking at all the dice, minis, books stacked around the table, going, yeah, but I bet it's really expensive. And so like that's why they did Player's Handbook +1 initially, was to keep down the amount of stuff at the table, kind of to
Mm.
keep the barrier to entry lower for people, or the perception of the barrier of entry into the game, which I found really interesting. We've got an article on our website that is like, about you could play D&D forever without spending a dime because there is so many free resources out there.
For sure, yeah. Like you don't even have to buy dice really. You just download an app or something. So yeah.
Yeah. Or you could like it's everywhere from like free to like you're going to need to take out another mortgage on your house.
But
uh,
yeah,
are
it's just
you
how much you want to put into it, I guess.
are you theater of the mind or maps and minis?
I am definitely maps and minis. I love that. I'm like obsessed with minis.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things too where I add work for myself as the DM, but I mean I love it, so it's fine. But I I gotta have a map. I like I like print out maps and for the players and stuff. And I I will if I could find a suitable map, I've like made my own maps. I'm definitely the maps and minis guy.
Yeah, so like I tend to be theater of the mind. I kind of like break things out tactically when when there's a lot going on. But then Ted loves like crafting and creating terrain and doing all that stuff. And we're about to switch roles at the table, and I'm afraid he spoiled them.
Yeah. Well, I do I think there is something very valuable about m- you know making people use their imagination, and I think you can have some really good moments. And sometimes I do feel like maybe I'm taking something away if there's like an actual physical thing there. But I I can't really put into words why I like it so much, but it's just really cool to me just to have the monster on the board there. Like that's just awesome to me.
It definitely adds a tactile component to the experience, right?
Yeah.
And people perceive the world different ways. So, like, if you're more of a tactile person, you are definitely going to enjoy maps and minis at the table far more than Theater of
Yeah.
the Mind, most likely. Um, I do think, like, sometimes, like, the more stuff that I use, the lazier I get as a DM sometimes, as far
Hmm.
as descriptions and explaining things, where you're
Yeah.
just like, because it's like, a thousand, one picture's worth 1,000 words, right? And you just boom, look,
Yeah.
this is what you say. Um,
Yeah. And that's kind of what I was sort of saying, because I've had experiences where um I'll like when I first started DMing, I would try to like have images of, all of the major NPCs and things like that. But I kind of stopped doing that because I feel like you can just tell by looks on people's faces when you describe something really well that it's just like really effective, just in a way that showing them a picture isn't.
it's
Um,
more engaging, I think.
yeah, yeah,
Like, if you just show a picture sometimes, it doesn't break state. So like if people are at the table doing whatever and you just put up a picture and they're kind of like it's there and they look at it. But I feel like if you get involved with a really good description of a scene, it sucks them in and it breaks state at the table so that they're focused on whatever that thing is. They no longer
mhm,
care about whatever else was going on. And and I mean, you can do that with a piece of art sometimes, but it has to be like a super, really fantastic piece of art
right.
that like hits them over the head.
And I saw that, and but we had like a good almost year where my game was we were playing online. Like we usually play in
Yeah.
person, but we were playing online obviously because of the
The year we'll
pandemic.
never mention.
Yeah. Um but and it was fine. Like it's not I didn't perceive it as like, I mean obviously like being in person I is better, but I didn't think of it as like less than our normal game where we actually have all the minis and stuff. So, it's still good. It's still D&D.
Did you use Theater of the Mind or did you use a VTT?
We use straight theater to mind. We just in a Discord call.
And that's like another thing that's so cool about the game. Like you can do that, and that is one of the good things about 2020. I think it has sucked a lot more people into the game that weren't involved because they just had more time on their hands,
Yeah.
and like and even players that were used to playing, but maybe they couldn't find a home group anymore. They couldn't find a place to gather in person, and they just weren't willing to go online. But like because everyone was online playing, it breaks their inertia. So like, and that's like as humans, right? That's one of the hardest things is breaking our inertia. But once you do it, right, then it's so much easier to do it going forward. So I hope
Hmm.
that if nothing else from those dark days, we do have more people playing and people that are playing that couldn't find games before are like, you know what? I got this weird schedule, but I can play with people in Australia or
Yeah.
the UK or wherever.
Yeah. I would probably think that that would be an outcome of that. Um at least I mean I don't have a great sample size, but I feel like I heard a lot of stories of people that started playing, during that time. So,
There's a company called Describe, and they just create flavor text for gaming. And they started. It was two brother-in-laws. One of them was a gamer. One of them would make fun of the gamer, but like they convinced the one to start during the pandemic. They did, fell in love with it, and then they ended up starting a business based around it. Where having started out as being someone that would make fun of people that played the game to being someone that's playing the game and running a business about the game. So
yeah.
I've definitely heard some different stories with a lot of people getting started then during the pandemic. So it's really cool. So we are just past the hour mark. Final thoughts before we head out?
Um, no, I mean, just thanks for inviting me on. It's been a fun chat. I think we were talking before about how I'm like trying to slowly weasel my way into the
Yeah.
the D&D community, or the RPG community online. So uh, thanks for helping me out with that.
Sure. I appreciate you coming on. And as always, in the description, you can find links. Check out T1J, check out his D&D video, and follow him on the socials. And until next time, stay nerdy.
See ya.